Thank you so much, everyone. We're going to get started. I think we managed to not be too many minutes late, despite the previous session running over. So before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge the land that we're on today, which is the land of the Wurundjeri people and the Boon Wurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I hope you can hear okay, despite all the bustling happening and the door opening and closing. So welcome to our session. Welcome to our family too. We are a bit of a family. Welcome to our session, Modern Family, The Ties That Bind, with Isabelle Oderberg. We've got Marina Kamenev and Katia Ariel. My name is Roz Bellamy, and I'll be moderating the panel this afternoon. A few housekeeping things just before we get started. So if we have time, which I'm not convinced we will, we'll throw to questions, but please keep the questions very concise. And a reminder also that there's the wonderful Avenue Bookshop just behind in the hub, and the authors will be signing books afterwards, so please make your way there for signings. Okay, so 3 authors, 3 very different books we're looking at today. I might skip our bios so we have maximum time, because you can have a look at those online, but be convinced they're wonderful people, all with very interesting backgrounds to their books as well. So I'm going to just jump right into it today. My first question is for all of you, which is to tell us a little bit about the process of your books coming about. I'm going to call it the birthing process, since we have Izzy with her expertise on miscarriage and aspects of fertility, but also because we're talking family, let's talk at the birth of the book. What can you tell us about your process? Maybe we'll start down the end with Katia.
Yeah. I'm going to say that it is so comparable to gestating an actual human and then pushing them out of your body that, I mean, like across every single plane. Aside from the fact that I think I really write from my body, and all the stories that go through me go through kind of my sensory apparatus before they go on the page. It is very much a process of carrying something really precious and really private that you're sort of simultaneously desperate to reveal but also extremely protective of. And when it emerges in the world, that feeling just amplifies by 1,000, I think. So in that way it's comparable, but you know, of course there's other things, and maybe you guys can speak to the craft of it or something, but for me that's like really where it lands in, the fact that you really nurture it in the deepest parts of yourself. Well, I did.
Beautiful.
Mine's less beautiful. I was not very nurturing, but I did compare it to childbirth a lot. Like I was overdue. There were contractions. There was a ring of fire. It was my book was 2 years too late. So that kind of the pressure of just trying to get it out and get it done. But I definitely there is something to that, but less beautiful than that for me.
I didn't want to write a book. The irony that I wrote a book before my partner, who was always going to write a book, was bizarre to me. So I was really angry when I realised that it was a book and not just, because I'm a journalist, like a series of feature articles or something like that. That's how I envisaged it. And then the deeper I got into it, the more I was like, oh God, no, I've got to write a book. And I just was really overwhelmed by that because it was too big. The topic was too big, and the different sort of subjects that it traversed and crossed over with. And then there was a lot of pressure from within the publishing sector for it to be a memoir. And I knew I didn't want to write a memoir, but I also knew that part of me needed to be in the book because I had this life experience and this lived experience. So I kind of created a new genre, which confused the hell out of everyone. So yeah, it was a very interesting process. But I stuck to my guns, and I'm very happy with the results. So you have to be happy with your own book.
And maybe we can talk about the genre and the style that each of you have written. I'm going to hold them up. Since I didn't talk about your bios, I'll at least hold the books up and kind of everyone can see it visually, and then head off to the bookshop afterwards. So Izzy, since you spoke last, if you want to kind of, you told us about managing that difference between memoir and that pressure to write memoir, I should say, and then bringing yourself into the book. How did you know where, how much and where to stop with that?
So I guess I saw, as a journalist, when I started researching my book, and it's about miscarriage, so I had 7 losses myself. I have 2 living children. And I had all these questions in myself around, well, why did this happen and why doesn't anyone talk about it? And there were a lot of acknowledgements of the silence, but like no explanation as to where it came from culturally, historically, anything like that. And a little hint, it wasn't always like that. That's quite a modern thing that we don't talk about it. So I kind of went down this rabbit hole of investigation and just couldn't stop. It just kept going and going. And like the way that pollution affects our fertility, the way that climate change affects our fertility, the way that that miscarriage is treated by the feminist school of thought, and it's so different to abortion. And like all of these things that kind of, I just kept going and going and I couldn't stop. And then I ended up with this fairly, it was light in that I'm pretty good at inserting humour into things, but equally it needed more of me in that, I think for context, to kind of bookend these sections of research so that people never forgot why I was doing it. So for me, it was like always, we called them vignettes during the process. So you'd have these chapters of investigation that were very informative and interesting, but then also these vignettes of my story where you could just stop and breathe for a minute and remember that it all comes back to human beings. So that's kind of the structure of how mine happened. And my publisher said to me, don't bother giving them more than 80,000 words. No publisher wants more than 80,000 words. My book clocks in at 130,000 words. They didn't cut a word of it. So I just kept going and going and it was but it was very different and no one thought it was going to work. Everyone was like, that's not going to work, that's not going to work. And I was like, I'll make it work. And I did, so, that's nice.
Marina, you, like Isabelle being a journalist, how did you manage that? Did you also get pressure to write more memoir style?
I think also like when I had the book proposal, it was really tricky to kind of sell it because it's not my story, and because my book's about the way that families have changed from the nuclear family, and I have like the prototypical nuclear family. And also I'm not an expert on the topic. I'm not a fertility doctor. So I had to kind of mention.
But you're Jewish and we're all sort of doctors, right?
Yeah. Like I believe I'm a doctor.
Yeah, we all do.
Yeah. But yeah, I couldn't quite pitch that. But it was difficult because I kind of felt all the time that I had to sort of apologise for my privilege of being in a nuclear family, and I kept kind of saying that because it was just, and even when I interviewed people, they would say, well, why are you writing this? And I didn't have a very good answer. But
and Katia, I mean, like me on this panel, we're the memoirists with these two journos. What about you? Were you always sure that you would write a memoir? Did it kind of come upon you? How did you enter this space?
Yeah, I don't think there is anything in my book that's not personal, that's not deeply personal. And so for me, I don't think the question was, is it a memoir? It was a question of modulating how much I revealed. And, like when I teach memoir, I think that's one of the key skills to get right, is that kind of fine line between being really generous with the reader and giving of yourself deeply, and yet doing that in a way that shows consideration for their time and their curiosity, and trying to kind of intuit what actually serves the story, because there are so many fascinating and truthful and intricate things about every one of our interiors, but not all of them belong in a book.
did you have a clear line in your head?
No, the story revealed itself.
So I was also going to ask about reactions to your books, and feel free to answer whatever order you like, but I know, Izzy, even just the process of trying to get yours published, you had pushback about the topic and whether people would read a book about miscarriage. How have you navigated things like publicity and, getting your book out there when it's a topic that's still considered, if not taboo, at least unpalatable?
So I'm like the most stubborn person you'll ever meet in your entire life. My parents are here, they will attest to it, just ask them. And so I was like, I could feel the door, that closed door, and I was like, I'm going through that door. I don't care, no one's going to stop me. And but I think I really underestimated like how hard things were going to get. ABC Breakfast said, we don't want to have her on because we don't want to talk about that topic during breakfast. And then the project didn't want to have me on because they're like, oh, no one wants to hear about that during dinner. And it's like, so you're happy to talk about like sexual abuse in the clergy, rape, domestic violence, like, but oh God, miscarriage too far, whoa. You know, like I don't know what they thought I was going to say when I got up there, but, and what was really interesting is that a friend of mine who's a journalist at the ABC said, when are you going to be on? And I said, well, I'm not, they don't want me. And she went bananas and she called the producer and like went ballistic and said like, how can you not do this? This affects 150,000. Like everyone knows someone, right, who's been touched by it in some way. And when I went on there, Madeline Morris was the female host that morning with Michael Rowland, and she disclosed she'd had 3 miscarriages on air with me, you know. So it's like, it's still hard. It's still hard and I'm still fighting, but I'm the most stubborn person in the entire universe and I'm going to keep fighting. But I feel like I'm making traction. I just feel like it's a slow burn. I also think there's like a fundamental misconception about what my book is. It's not a handbook for people who have miscarriages. There's some of that. There's definitely support and empowerment, but it's much, much more and much more broad than that. And I think that the biggest compliment that I get, other than people contacting me and saying, thank you so much, this has helped me so much, is the people who have not had a loss, maybe someone they know who's had a loss, and they say, I didn't think this book was for me, but I got so much out of it. And that's like, yes, my heart sings. So, yeah.
That's wonderful.
But yeah, it's been an uphill slog.
Yeah. I need you to repeat the question.
I'll personalise and repeat it for you. So maybe I'll start with Katia first.
Yeah.
So your book was shortlisted for the Stella.
Yeah.
Mazel tov. Clearly there's been, recognition of it, which is wonderful to see. Have you had people, how have they reacted to it? It's such a personal story. Have people wanted to tell you about their own loves and experiences?
Yeah, I've had a lot of that. I mean, I get lots of beautiful mail from women saying, my wife and I have been reading this in bed. That's my favourite category, my favourite demographic of fan. But I also get, old straight men writing to me and calling me and saying I was in tears. And that was a demographic that always baffled me until I realised that actually my book speaks a lot to grief, and it speaks a lot to the quicksand of life and the way that vitality escapes us, and life force can be so elusive, and sorrow is just around every corner. And so I then understood why that speaks to old, straight, single, lonely men, because I mean, it's in a way better than any of us, they know that it's coming. And so I've had surprising bridges built into the psyches of people I wouldn't have expected. Who else? Mums love it. My mum loves it.
Yeah. We love a supportive mummichka in the crowd. Beautiful, thank you.
I love it. It's amazing.
It's a beautiful book. All your books. And so for you, Marina, with your book, with the style that you've written as well, I'm curious how people have engaged with it. I'm sure people learn so much. Do they tell you that?
I guess when they're interviewing me, but it's not, I think I really retreated from life for 3 years. If we're talking childbirth, this is the placenta, the part that I just didn't really think about. But and I'm trying not to, but a lot of my friends just haven't read it. It's very dense. It's non-fiction. It's not an easy kind of. It doesn't have a narrative or a lead character, so it's not kind of this thing that's easy to read. And a lot of people I'm going to read it, I promise, and it's.
I totally think you're underplaying it. It is so easy to read.
It
is very accessible.
Well, but
and I
do
have the
think
worst ADHD of anyone, and I was wolfing it down.
But I think non-fiction is a particular. You have to really be in that kind of in the mood, and I don't know. It's interesting, but then some people that do love it really love it, and it's surprising. But I don't know. I haven't.
Maybe you don't get the same. It doesn't get told to you the same way as someone that's written a really personal book.
Maybe. But also, I don't know. I feel like the book tortured me for so many years.
I know for myself, I followed my wife around the house reciting passages from yours.
Speaking of how similar it is to parenthood, it sounds like my children. So,
Beautiful. So another thing I wanted to talk about, particularly being at a Jewish festival, is writing about topics that are usually considered private, taboo, or things that you should keep secret. And I say Jewish festival because I think 3 of us at least on this panel have Eastern European, Russian, Ukrainian, Jewish backgrounds. Where I know for me anyway, I'm just putting this onto you. I don't know if it's true, but for me, it's a lot of secret keeping for safety is what my family history sort of brought to me. So I'm curious, how you tackled that with these very intimate topics, even for you, Marina, where it is straight non-fiction, but still, it covers so many topics that make people a bit uncomfortable. How did you tackle the fact that you're writing a book that might, others might say makes you brave or?
I have I have these Russian, particularly my dad, proper Russian parents who don't want anything that's private to be public. But I also kind of, I feel, I had so many friends with, who experienced miscarriage, for example, and it was before Beyonce did. I feel like Beyonce, there was a sort of shift after Beyonce, but there was so much shame and stigma, and I refused. So I was very kind of, I don't know, I was always very forward and just honest, and I didn't have issues with much of it.
Maybe it's also that generational thing of, okay, it's privacy and secrecy for you, and I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, and also my dad's not going to read the book anyway, so it's not not in an offensive way. It's just so it's it's different.
Yeah. What about you, Katia? I don't know if you face the same, given you've got family showing up and supporting, and who've clearly read and loved the book. How do you tackle that feeling of you've written about a lesbian love,
I never had issue with it because I'm not ashamed of it. And I just actually not ashamed of anything in the book. Even if I'm squeamish about it, I'm not ashamed of it. And I actually think that probably makes for the richest memoir writing, is that sweet spot that gets inside something that is possibly going to push people a little bit, only to discover that they are not alone in what they feel. And I think if I have one imperative as a writer, it is that. It is for even one person to open the pages of my book and go, oh, thank fuck, I'm not alone. I wake up at 3 a.m. thinking that too, and I think that's the gift. That's how you give your heart as an author without bleeding all over the page. You kind of estimate the pain points and the shame points that are actually the points that unite us all.
That's lovely. Thank you. Izzy, you've told us your answer, which is that you're stubborn as hell anyway. But is there anything you wanted to add?
I don't think I have the ability to feel shame. I think I was born without it. I definitely read parts of it to my family, and so my husband is also a writer and a journalist, and he's Aboriginal as well, so there were cultural things that I needed to get permission from him or his family to write about and have in the public space. I also felt like his privacy was very important, and he's super private. So there was only one part that he asked me to take out, which was more about his story than mine, and I was like, yeah, that's fair. My mum didn't ask me to take anything out, I don't think. I'm looking at her going, I don't think there was anything. I don't think my mum feels shame either. I think neither of us. I was just raised not to feel shame. It's make decisions that you can always stand by.
I think you could run workshops on that.
I think I could. Yeah. I think make decisions that you want to stand by and you'll never feel shame. But I think in terms of the Jewish community, there was a section of the book where I talked about how I was treated by Orthodox Jewry. So my last loss was the worst one, and I had a medical termination at 14 weeks. Because there was a genetic anomaly. And my obstetrician is Jewish. She's still one of the best people I know. And she said, how are you doing? How are you recovering? And I said, I feel like I just need something. I need something to bookend it so that I can go into the next pregnancy. And she said, do you want to go to mikveh? And I said, actually, that would be perfect, right? I can immerse myself, kind of cleanse this away as much as you can, that kind of grief. And I was told I wasn't welcome at the mikveh because my partner is not Jewish, so therefore we are not, our marriage isn't recognised, my baby's a mumza, my living child, I should say. And like that was really hard. I get choked up even thinking about it because it's like when your whole family on one side is like wiped out in the Holocaust, you're Jewish enough for that to happen, but you're not Jewish enough to go to mikveh. I don't know, it just felt like I'd been Orthodox Jew my whole life and they like abandoned me when I needed them the most. And so I wrote about that. And I also wrote about how I found a new community. And I think that's kind of what I tried to do in my book, was like cover the things that were horrible, but also find some kind of light at the end of the tunnel in everything that I did. But in terms of the Jewish community, I was really nervous about that, just the way it would be received and, you know, but mostly people have been like super supportive, so.
And I mean, you're here today. So
I am, hello, hi.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
So I haven't been blacklisted yet, there's still time, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Wow. Yeah, it is interesting to discuss those things. Like I do like on panels where we go on these little tangents, you know, of things. But thinking about the mikveh for me, because I've written about it too, and like as a person married to a woman, like you know, I've experienced that too, where I've wanted to go and check out a mikveh and kind of been pushed back. And I think there's like a bigger conversation to have there about that topic. But it's just interesting, particularly this panel talking about family and also reproduction, just to notice like, you know, our Judaism in some ways, to different extents in our books comes up, but then also, yeah, it's something that like can guide, but also push us away at times.
I think if your community makes you feel shame, you need a new community. Like I'm still part of the Jewish community, but I found a part of the community that accepts me, my partner, my children for who I am. And I'm very Jewish. I'm a unicorn. Like I'm the most, you know, it's such an integral part of who I am, always, my culture, everything. And I found a place where I fit in, and that's how it works. You find a place where you feel at home. That's what community is, right? You have to feel at home. So,
yeah. Thank you.
So I would also like to talk about sex in the books. So I think maybe I'll start with you, Katia, because I know one of the things that like I would notice occasionally, like I think I saw the judges' comments for the Stella, and I see it not just the judges, but I see it in reviewers too. There's always a little bit of like, oh, like they really enjoyed that aspect of your book.
You like sex well, girl. It's a good, sexy book.
Can you tell us about it? Because you know, there's these things
in front of your mum.
Hey, I did mention.
I'm not ashamed.
I did. You don't feel shame, and I did mention to you last night, and you gave me the go-ahead to ask.
But what specifically the craft of writing?
The craft
good sex?
of writing it, because you know how we have these things like these jokey awards for bad sex writing.
Yes.
So you're the opposite of that. You're an award for good. I mean, not just that, but that's one aspect. Could you tell us a bit about how you do it?
I think the rules of writing good sex are very similar to the rules of good writing generally. When you are at a point that's really heightened, say less. When you want to speak to a body part, do it. I mean, there's actually no body parts at all. There's no genitals anywhere in the book, but there's a lot of erotic energy, and I think it's because I use figurative language wherever I can to convey the sensation. And so, not...
there's no...
I was going to put...
No members, you know, all the euphemisms for genitals that people use.
So, I worked a lot with actually like the poetry of the moment, and that actually our entire body is erotic, right? And that a fixation on genitals to me is very dull and very kind of old-fashioned, and that probably most of the sexy moments in this book are about the way someone's neck smells, or the way their voice breaks in a particular moment, or the way they move their hands through space, or these kind of minute details that I think are erotic, not because they're grounded in some kind of orgasmic culmination, but because having an erotic desire for someone is about observing them really closely. And I spent the entire book just conveying that observation. And feeling desired is about being really seen. And so I think that's where it is. It's that braid of I see you, you see me, I see you, you see me, and it just escalates, and that is sexy, I think.
There you have it, everyone. We too can now go away and maybe try to your extent.
See each other.
Yeah, I love that. That's wonderful advice. Izzy, there's a funny scene in your book between you and your mum that I immediately took a photo of and sent to my mum, where you're talking about conceiving through IVF.
Oh, yeah.
And would you like to kind of recap for us?
I'm going to swear, so just get ready for it. Sorry, Mum. We were at an H&M in Hong Kong, and I said, you know, my life is full. I feel like I've achieved so much and whatever, but I just really want to have a family. And at this point, I didn't have a partner. And I was sort of starting to think about maybe having IVF on my own. And I said, you know, maybe I should go down that road. And she said, why don't you just go to a club and take some guy home and fuck him? And I just looked at her and I went, like, there are better ways to do this. Like, like, you know, I don't want some kind of nasty rash. B, like, how would I ever find them again if my child wanted to, you know, meet their parent? Like, there are better ways to do this. Is the crux of it. But, you know, I'm so blessed in that both of my parents are, like, really, really liberal-minded, small L, and very, you know, like, it was just never... I ended up having IUI on my own. I had one round. I met my husband 2 weeks later. I just found out the first round had failed, and he asked me to pause that situation. And, yeah, we ended up, you know, starting a family, and it's been 10 years now. But yes, that was very, very funny. I mean, like, you know, there was also scenes in the book where, you know, when you're trying to conceive after loss, it can feel desperate because you just so desperately want to be pregnant again. And it can turn sex into a bit of a chore. And there was a very funny thing that happened with us where I made a decision after a particularly unpleasant attempt at conception, where my husband walked into the house one day and I had, like, we have a very big TV in the living room and there was just pornography and I was in lingerie and I was like, now's the time to ask me, like, if there any, you know, I'm ovulating, so anything you want to do that we've never done. And, you know, but in that kind of, like, funny sort of trying to add the levity, there was, like, a really important lesson for people who are trying to conceive after loss, which is you got to try and have some fun. If you turn it into a chore, it's going to make you more sad. It's going to add to your grief. It's going to make it heavy. And so, yeah, I had a lot of fun writing some of those scenes.
Oh, I can tell.
Yeah.
And my husband,
It shows.
I thought he'd take them out, but he was like, no, it's okay, because he understood the value. It wasn't like just for laughs. It wasn't just for, you know, there was actual value to be learned in those scenes. So, but yes, I'm really shocked he let me keep them in. He's very private, so
Yeah.
Not like me, I tell everyone everything. You see me after the show, but yeah.
Marina, one thing I found really skillful about your book is the way that you manage to be objective when you're taking us through really complicated stuff. I'm going to use surrogacy as an example because that one I think I was most gripped by. And you take us through so many different arguments and perspectives. You read different people, some, you know, you didn't agree with. And I only know that because I know you, not, you know, you didn't put it in the book. How did you grapple with that?
I don't know, I think I'm stronger as a writer and probably as a person when I operate sort of with a question mark rather than with an exclamation mark. And I think when you're sort of curious and open and you kind of, that's, I don't know, I think it's really important because if you kind of have these strong opinions, you shut down a conversation immediately. And I always just kept in mind, because I did conceive my kids naturally, I hate the use of that word, but, you know, I didn't, you know, I was lucky. And so I got the family that I wanted fairly easily. So I was really mindful of the fact that the people I was speaking to didn't. And I don't know what I would have done in their situation, so.
Yeah. Thank you. I asked each of you if you didn't mind reading a little bit to us today, just so the audience here can kind of get a flavour of your books. Are you happy to do that now? Yeah. Now, what order shall we go in?
Oh my gosh.
Will we start romantic and dreamy, or will we go?
No, let's end on romantic.
Okay, all right, let's do that. Which of you two would like to go first?
Am I going first?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're going first. I'll find the
All
page
right,
and
thanks.
rifle.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to read a vignette. It's called The Way I Are. I don't know why I had my septum pierced when I was 41. I think perhaps I'd finally made a decision to throw off the conservative shackles I'd felt bound by working in large formal newsrooms. My first and most enduring beat was business and finance, and you weren't going to get far with the suited and booted crowd if you didn't fit in. Either way, by the time I was 41, I'd shaved half my head, my body was covered in tattoos, and I just had my septum pierced. A couple of days after the piercing was done, I had an important interview. Apparently no one had told the kid, who woke me up with a swift kick to the face. It was so hard I saw stars, and my eyes took a good few minutes to relocate their focus. Good morning to you too, pumpkin. The interview was with a highly regarded doctor who a few people had said was someone worth chatting to. She was extremely accomplished, super smart, and had a special interest in miscarriage and pregnancy loss. It was a 25-minute walk or so from our hotel down to her office. Masks weren't yet compulsory where I was visiting, unlike in Melbourne, so I walked through the crisp May sunshine, enjoying the vitamin D, being able to access my chin for the first time in a while. People stared at me as I walked down the street, probably because of my new piercing, and my happy laissez-faire air as I walked joyfully down that summer street. I found the building, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd been in such a fancy place. They had lifts. I stepped inside, and my own reflection greeted me. But as I stared back at myself, I blanched under the blood splatters covering the entire lower part of my face. It went from just above my nostrils all the way down to my chin. I looked like someone had punched me. Oh, wait. The memory of a tiny little foot hurtling back towards my face came roaring to my mind, along with the whisper of a toddler's giggle. I reached into my pocket and grabbed a mask, put it on, walked straight into reception, explained I was there for a meeting but needed to use the ladies' room. I spent a good 10 minutes mopping up my face and came back into the reception area just as the good doctor had come out of her office to meet me. With the most phenomenal sunshine-drenched cityscape acting as a backdrop to our conversation through her huge office windows, she told me her life story. She was accomplished, intelligent, professional, and so impressive. She was sassy and so funny. We talked about miscarriage and loss and IVF. We discussed my own history of loss and the lack of answers provided by any of the testing I underwent. But as I listened to her accent, I found my mind wondering when I'd be able to travel overseas again and show my kids the world. Suddenly, I was jolted out of my reverie by something she said. I think you have a problem in your quality control. My head snapped up from my notebook. It wasn't the first time someone had suggested this as a possible reason for my multiple miscarriages. An overly receptive uterus is how one doctor had phrased it. It means that while other uteruses decline to implant something not quite right, my uterus lets anything implant, leading to a pregnancy rate of 10 out of 10, but a miscarriage rate of 7 out of 9. I don't want to slut shame your uterus, but I think you have a slutty uterus. You can laugh, it's okay. I paused briefly, and then I threw my head back and I laughed. I laughed so hard I felt tears forming in my eyes and my bloodied nose started to throb. A slutty uterus. Through my belly laughs, I wheezed. How soon can I get it printed on a t-shirt? Just for everyone.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Hi, my name's Izzy, and I have a slutty uterus.
Thank you.
So this is about Kate, who procured a sperm donor on Facebook and how she got pregnant. Kate had joined Sperm Donation Australia in July 2020 and published her post a fortnight later. As Diane would be carrying the pregnancy, she wanted Kate to choose the donor so she would feel closer to the child. The blurb Kate wrote was brief, an unfussy selfie of her and Diane, a description of their family, their location, and how far they were willing to travel, all of New South Wales. There wasn't much information about their ideal applicant. We're looking for AI which means artificial insemination, and we are happy to provide regular updates and even arrange a meet-up once a year, but no co-parenting, please. I asked Kate if she had other specifications that she hadn't disclosed to the Facebook group. Breathing was the main criteria, she joked. I know it sounds terrible, but from my experience in puppy breeding and working with animals, her job as a council ranger involves managing dangerous dogs. I've learned that personality is 80% what you make of it. Her approach to appearance was equally pragmatic. I'm blonde and Diane's got dark hair, so any donor could give us a child who looked like us. A Canberra man replied to their post. He was a prolific commenter on the Facebook page and volunteered himself every time women were searching for donors in the area. But every time Kate provided the dates of Diane's fertile window, he was unavailable. He just rubbed me the wrong way, Kate said. She preferred being guided by her intuition to ticking a shopping list of superficial characteristics. The women found their match in Byron, an awkward but endearing Sydney man in his 20s who was refreshingly upfront. While many sperm donors in the group either proclaim to have no genetic abnormalities or make no mention of health in their advertisement, Byron told Kate and Diane he was taking prescribed antidepressants almost as soon as he was done describing his height and eye colour. There was no sales pitch. He would often respond to online inquiries with a single word, and Kate read the fact that he had little to say as a sign that he had nothing to hide. Unlike the Canberra man, Byron was completely amendable to Diane's schedule. This was crucial as they would be making the 5-hour drive to Sydney to meet him, and in all likelihood it would take more than one trip for Diane to get pregnant. The last time Kate had tried to get pregnant, she got her body ready by drinking a mind-numbing amount of alcohol and planning a DIY insemination was more involved. Sorry, okay. They used over-the-counter ovulation predictor kits available at chemists, which detect the hormones in urines that signal ovulation with a smiley face. But the smiley face didn't work. Diane was peeing on sticks left, right, and centre, and the icon never showed. They charted all the details on a phone app, booked the hotel in Sydney where Byron would meet them, and hope for the best. They also had to gather equipment. Kate researched the insemination techniques that produced successful results. She packed conception-friendly lube, a 5mm syringe, an unused urine test plastic container, and a menstrual cup. Armed with a bag of plastic contraptions, Kate was still hoping to create an intimate moment, but this turned out to be a challenge. Due to COVID restrictions, Byron couldn't meet Kate and Diane in their room. She had to meet him in the lobby and sign him in at reception. The staff probably thought I was whoring, she said. Byron refused Kate's attempt to make small talk or eye contact in the lift up. Once in their room, Kate asked Byron to sanitise his hands and passed him the urine jar sample container. She asked Byron if she and Diane should leave the room for privacy, but he didn't think that would be necessary and headed straight to the bathroom. Kate and Diane tried to take the opportunity for romance. They cuddled and kissed on the bed and talked about what their future family would look like, but they couldn't concentrate. All they could hear was a rhythmic wet smacking, the unmistakable sound of Byron masturbating. At least it didn't take long. A few minutes later, Byron left the bathroom, handed back the no longer empty plastic jar, and backed out of the room. He made no attempt at polite conversation, and given the circumstances, Kate was grateful for the silence.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to read something not sexy. I mean, there are two options. I can do short and sexy, or I can do a little bit longer and something else. But I think I'm just going to go with this. When my mother was little, she loved sitting under the Christmas tree in the winter. All Jews had Christmas trees in Soviet Odessa because we were as Christian and pagan and communist atheist as anything else. We were whatever we were allowed to be. And in 1960s Odessa, this meant singing Yiddish songs at weddings and filling our tiny living rooms, which were also bedrooms, with a giant Christmas tree in December. The tree crowded the corner like a broad-shouldered, nebbish teenage cousin who'd come for the holidays and stood by awkwardly, head brushing the ceiling, watching us eat all our meals and fight all our fights and respire in our sleep, 6 to a room. The tree was also a majestic winter queen who smelled like the damp forest floor and exhaled the ticklish, minty breath of Siberian pine. Most importantly, it was where we hid our gifts of socks and pencils and, when eventually I came on the scene, Misha, the Olympic bear mascot, with his little gymnast's belt and caramel torso. Our gifts were always wrapped in newspaper, which we eventually used as toilet paper. which once upon a time, between coming off the Soviet printing press and travelling in a postal van to the little newsagent booth on the corner of Kanatnaya and Aranutskaya, would have sacrificed a few of its copies to the sausage factory. Because the first thing they ever did with newspapers was grind them up into the meat offcuts to bulk up the sandwich meat. See? See how that tree hid and harboured all our mixed selves? Jewish, pagan, communist, atheist, pragmatist. Every year my grandmother would give my mum a coin to go down the street and buy a tree decoration. When my mother recalls the ornaments now, she scrunches up her nose and tells me how ugly they were. But back then, these objects, powder blue enamel teardrops, bright red tin stars, turquoise spheres with shimmering snowflake equators, were my mother's most prized acquisitions. My mum tells me this Christmas story without a particular denouement, except to say that just this morning, as she was coming into waking, she had a vision of herself under that very tree. And the little Margarita asked the grown-up Margarita, who herself now is a grandma, who has done so much of her own painful wisdom getting, for a piece of life advice. Don't worry, just don't worry, said the present-day oracle of my mum. Most of what you are afraid of will never, ever happen. And the things that will test you, the things that will break you, but not forever, you can't predict anyhow, so don't worry. Here is why my mother's little Christmas moment matters. To speak about my mother and my grandmother, and of our ancestry, in fact, is to speak about worry. I am, of course, not exempt from this family portrait of anxiety. I stand in the black and white shot with the rest of them, our swarthy Semitic faces grim, our heavy psyches joined in one long knotted brow. Here is a daisy chain of dread I can remember from my childhood. You'll be hard-pressed not to notice the recurring themes. Don't open an umbrella inside or you'll lose all your money. Don't wipe the table with paper, cloth only, or you'll lose all your money. Don't kiss your guest over a threshold or you will have a fight. Don't step on someone's foot or you will have a fight. This one can be reversed if they step on you in return. Don't bang foreheads or you will have a fight. Don't leave keys on the table or you will lose all your money. Don't whistle inside or you will lose all your money. Don't sing before breakfast or you will lose all your money. Don't let your children walk under an electrical wire or they will stop growing. Don't step over your child while they are lying down or they will stop growing. Don't let your child sleep with their arms crossed over their chest or they might die young, an extreme version of they will stop growing. Don't mend a child's garment while they are wearing it, unless you put a little piece of red thread in their mouth, or they will stop growing. Don't let a marriageable young person sit on the corner of a table or they will stay single for 7 years. Don't break a mirror or there'll be sudden death. In terms of levity, we had these two. If you drop a fork, a woman is rushing to your house. If you drop a knife, it'll be a man. In other words, to speak of my lineage broadly, 3 or 4 bows below mine on the family tree, is to have a lively conversation with fear. But to notice just the dread, to ignore the radiant heroism inside these characters would be like having the conversation with balled up handkerchiefs in our mouths. So, to the heroism, to the resilience, in other words, to the women.
What a place to finish the readings. Thank you all so much for reading, and I'm sure everyone really enjoyed that as much as I did. We have 5 minutes left, so we have time for probably 1 or 2 very quick questions, and then otherwise we'll be signing in the hub, so you can always bring your questions in there when you get your book signed. Does anyone have a burning question now for anyone?
Or a not burning question.
Yeah. Yes. Just a simmering question.
What will the panel say about the ties that bind?
A lot of the people in my book were people who didn't know their ancestry. And it's really, I don't know, it's really interesting because I always thought in some ways love could override these things. But I guess in terms of the ties that bind, I sort of realised that, you know, genetics are, for whatever reason, they're important, and when you're missing them, you're missing that kind of tie to past generations or to future generations. So that was an interesting, I guess, for it.
Anyone else on ties that bind?
Yeah, go, Izzy.
I think from my perspective, one of the things that I explored within that sort of theme was around the relationships that don't survive, the stress of loss and the stress of grief. And I think that one of the big lessons I learned was that often men and women react really, really differently, and the reaction is not indicative of the feeling that person is having. So what is super common, this is according to research, is, you know, that a man, for instance, will not talk about his grief. It doesn't mean he's not experiencing it, but he might not talk about it as much as a female partner in a straight relationship. But the female partner takes that to mean that they're not experiencing grief, that they've just moved on. And often the one thing that, you know, that not fixes it, because that's the wrong word, but you know, that helps is that conversation and being open and honest. And that was definitely something I took home with all the research that I did, talking about these things, whether it's in the relationship or outside of the relationship, hence the reason I talk about my miscarriages really openly. Like, it's that conversation that helps everyone feel less alone and less grief-stricken. So in terms of the ties that bind, I think some of those ties, the more you talk, the more you feel bound in a positive way, not a negative way. Does that make sense? I don't know if I've made any sense. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. I think you guys have covered it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Unbinding ties, that's what I want to ask you about.
Yeah. No.
And any other questions? Otherwise, I have one more for them. No? Okay, my last question then is, if there's one thing you want readers to take away from your books?
Oh, what a great
What would it
question.
be?
To feel encouraged that it's never too late to come home to yourself.
Oh, that's amazing. Yes.
That you can hold two ideas at once that might not line up, and there are some things that just don't have a right answer or an easy answer.
It depends, like, my answer depends on who you are. I think people who've experienced loss, I want them to read the book and feel empowered to know what their rights are and that they're not alone. If you're a medical professional, I want you to do better, quite frankly. If you're a feminist, I want you to be much more expansive in the way that you think about feminism and who you include in that umbrella, that school of thought. But for everyone here today, for my book, I mean, and Roz has a book as well, Mood, which is an amazing memoir. But for my book, I would say maybe pick it up. It's not what you think it is. So I would start there.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
If you could all join me in thanking these three wonderful authors. Thank you. Thank you so much. And as I said many times, they'll be signing, so we hope to see you back there in the hub. Thank you all for coming to this session.